What's this? A real challenge? You've finally caught my attention. A fellow exile. One more fool under Zana's sway. Allow me to destroy you before she has a chance to betray you, too. At least, my way will be quick. You slew my friends! You brought ruin to my world! You have invaded my very sanctum. I should be furious, and yet I feel nothing. How boring and small. Destroying you is as easy as flicking a pest. Did you really think this would work? I transcended all this long ago. Feel the thrill of
the void. Why run? What's the point? Your lives are meaningless. Watch UT crumble.
But now you will fight on my lands. You assumed I share the same weakness as my fellows. And now you come to me. Is it bravery or foolishness? You will long for
non-existence. Rain of stars. Everlasting fire. Glorious flames. Be silent.
Hey everybody, welcome, it's Baron, and this is the Week 1 update on the Hexblast Minor Occultist. So far, things have been going really well. My league start went very smoothly, other than, there's the usual kind of getting stuck in the mire around white maps, yellow maps, somewhere in there. Usually you hit a little bit of wall at some point, and for me, it was around the point that I wanted to be switching out of Blasphemy and into my profane proxy setup. So around there, I needed to make some changes, put a little investment in, but at no point did it feel bad. It was just a natural part of progressing the build at League start, and I was very quickly able to invest into it with the limited currency that I was getting just from Chaos Recipe, a little bit of heisting, that kind of a thing. So throughout this week, I've actually made a lot of changes to the build, and not changes that have stuck. I've made changes iteratively, a little bit here, a little bit there. Maybe I'll take one of the changes that I made and undo it, replace it with something else. So let's talk a little bit about that. I think the main thing that I spent a lot of time doing different variations on was the mana reservation versus curse, having a curse as an aura versus not. If you don't have it, what auras do you have in its place, and how are you applying the curse? I went through so many iterations on that. There was Anathema was involved at one point. Whispers of Doom was involved at one point. Sometimes I had 7 curses, sometimes I had 2 or even just 1. There are different ways of applying curse on hit, just a lot of different variations of it. And we'll talk a little bit more about it when we get to the DPS section of the video, but spoiler alert, we wound up applying 2 curses, one with Profane Proxy and one with a curse on hit ring. There is no aura setup and there is no Whispers of Doom. So that's about how that wound up. Speaking of which, actually, let's talk a little bit about that. Anathema, I talked a big game about Anathema when I put out the video on my plan for League Start, and I used it, I bought it, and I used it for a few days. It was handy, but I was finding a few things. Number one, I was finding that even though it allowed me to apply more curses in theory, in practice, I was frequently not applying as many because it took a ring slot, which could have otherwise been filled by a curse on hit ring. So even though I could now apply up to 7 curses, the vast majority of enemies were dying with only 1 curse on them, and that was the Profane Proxy Frostbite. It was what I had in there at the time. So that was one thing. The other thing was, the number of curses that I had to have socketed was really putting a lot of pressure on my gem slots. There's a lot that we want in this build, and if you're applying 7 curses, even if one of them is coming from an item, that's a lot. So between those things and just wanting the other stats that can come with a nice normal ring, needing to shore up attributes, wanting to get some mana cost on there, all of that was just a reason to switch out of Anathema and into a normal ring and go down to 2 curses instead of a zillion of them. The other thing that went along with that was switching up my Ascendancy. So, in fact, this was kind of a coincidence here. That change to curses happened around the same time that somebody very helpfully made a comment on my first video where they pointed out that I was not getting the benefit of Vile Bastions regenerate 2% of energy shield per second for each enemy you and your minions have killed, up to 10%. The mines were not giving me that bonus. So this Ascendancy point was giving me very little, and so I had no regrets, no compunctions about switching over to Unholy Authority instead, which was a big factor in letting me free up that ring slot and getting rid of Anathema. I also made some changes to my plans for applying Wither. So we know that Wither is applied by the Ascendancy, but we also know that that's slow. That is only 1 Wither per second, and the passive point that you could assign for it, the Mastery, is inconsistent. It's only a 5% chance when you apply Withered, so that is not consistent enough, and I wanted something that I could use on a consistent basis, so I did actually wind up going with the same setup that a lot of players do. Even the Saboteur version of this build uses the Wither Spell Totem setup. I've gone back and forth on this one. Sometimes I use multiple totems, sometimes I need that gem slot for something else. Right now I am linking it with multiple totems, and it's just very handy for boss fights. There's nothing complicated there. You just get your Wither up way faster than the Ascendancy could apply it, but the Ascendancy is still nice. Not only does it add to the Wither that your totems are providing, but also just in a mapping scenario, if you're around an enemy for more than a second, they start stacking up that damage as well. So it's not nothing. This is still a big deal. Other changes to the original plan. So originally I had talked about using a Badge of the Brotherhood amulet, and I never actually did buy one. I had the currency for it, and I veered off and went in a different direction instead. I went for All's Uprising, and in this case, it is a almost entirely defensive option. That 50% increased crit for nearby enemies, that actually does help us a little bit, but primarily this decision was made for defensive reasons. Number one, I wanted Discipline as an aura just to beef up my health pool without having to spend points on the tree. And number two, there was a Watcher's Eye mod that I wanted that required me to have Discipline. Future Baron jumping in here. This is the aforementioned Watcher's Eye right here. This was by far the most elegant solution to it. What I would like to do at some point is replace this All's Uprising with one that makes Determination free, or just skip straight ahead and do Ashes of the Stars, which should make up for everything, I think. But at this point, I'm able to have Discipline, and I'm able to get my Watcher's Eye mod that gives me additional spell block while I've got Discipline on. And so that was a big change. I was going to do Badge of the Brotherhood, which would have given me more Frenzy charges, but I don't miss it that much. In this particular build, you are not attacking or casting, so you don't get one of the primary benefits of Frenzy charges. You do get, thanks to Charge Mind support, you would get increased Mind Throwing speed, so it's not nothing. That is important, increased Mind Throwing speed, and then you would get sort of the native movement speed that comes along with Frenzy charges just by virtue of having them. You get more movement speed, but it just wasn't worth it to me. I sacrificed a little bit of DPS to gain a lot of defense by swapping out my amulet. Are there other things to talk about? Yeah, eventually I would like to, if I were to switch over to either Ashes of the Stars or to a Determination, All's Uprising, what I'd like to do with that extra unreserved mana is to maybe invest in taking Arrogance off of my Defiance banner. Right now you can see I'm reserving life, and I'm actually losing a big chunk of 400 of my hit pool to the fact that I'm reserving it with Arrogance. So if I got an amulet that discounted a more expensive aura, I may have the mana to reserve that, and that would also mean that I could save a point back. This point right here, 20% increased life reservation efficiency of skills, and this build is definitely point starved, so we would love to be able to do that. I also have not yet found a way to squeeze in endurance charges. Now that's something that I said was going to be part of this build, but I don't consider this a big change because I still want to do this. I'm still playing with ways of how I can introduce endurance charges into the build. So one idea I've had is using a Megalomaniac, if one pops up on the market, that either gives one of these three notables: Enduring Composure, Enduring Ward, or Rote Reinforcement. And then just another couple good nodes, probably with some DPS on them. But what I would need to test out is, how do Rote Reinforcement and Enduring Ward feel in practice? So these are the ones that give you endurance charges when you block, and it's possible that it's kind of it might be a feels bad man mechanic where you need to block a couple hits to get your endurance charges going in the first place, and that might lead to them being inconsistent. I just have to see. I would love to be able to do Enduring Cry and just take out the middleman there. And I think at the moment I could even fit in the gem for Enduring Cry, but it wouldn't be instant, and that seems like it would be a really big pain in the rear end to have to stop and cast Enduring Cry all the time instead of just clicking spacebar as you run and have it cast instantly. It's just that if we look at the tree here, I'm just not close enough to justify coming down here to call the arms. I would have to rework my tree so hard. Don't get me wrong, there's stuff that's worth taking along the way. Like, I love get another endurance charge, Barbarism is a great node, there's stuff to pick up, but there's more important stuff up here. I just can't do without it. So one very expensive solution that I could go with is a Skin of the Lords that has Call to Arms allocated on it, but that's going to be dozens of divine, so that's not it's not something I'm upgrading tomorrow. So at the moment, lack of endurance charges, it is kind of a change to the build, but I do plan on getting back on track with that sooner or later. So those are kind of the general switches and changes that I've made. Let's talk about some specifics on offense and defense. So on offense, DPS. Needless to say, Sandstorm Visage, centerpiece of the build. Between this and power charge stacking, that's already most of the way there to getting crit cap. We're having no difficulty at all in getting crit cap without even needing to use Assassin's Mark or increased critical strike support, which are often really important crutches for builds that are struggling to get crit cap. We don't need those. So to start with, we've got Hillock quality'd up my Void Battery to 28. I did that myself. I went and as soon as I got a Hillock there, I was like, hey, I actually need that. So I went and bought a Void Battery right then and brought it into the already open Portal of Katarina's lair. And so it's got 28 quality on it, and then that is combined with the Harvest enchant that gives critical strike chance per 4% quality, meaning that the base crit on the weapon is a whopping 8.56. Now, there are going to be rare weapons that have a way easier time. You can get over 10, maybe even over 11 base crit based on the mods on a rare weapon, but clearly Void Battery has other good stuff going for it, and because the Occultist has such an easy time with power charge scaling in getting crit capped, we don't even really need to worry about getting our base crit that high. 8.5 is already plenty, and what that means is at 8.56 we would need to get between 1100 and 1200% increased critical strike chance somewhere in order to get to that cap of 100. Now that sounds like a lot, it might sound high, but you got to remember, again, the Occultist Ascendancy is going to make this way easier on us than any other Ascendancy, or any other Ascendancy besides maybe Inquisitor or Assassin. But we're doing pretty well here. So we have 8 power charges, including the one that we're getting from the Void Battery. They have the native effect of automatically giving 50% increased critical strike chance per charge. The skill tree, this node up here, adds another 8, and then on top of that, the charged mind support also works the same way, adding an additional 25 per power charge. That means just by investing in power charges and getting up to max power charges, that right alone is 660% increased crit. We're over halfway there just from the power charges, which is crazy. We've also got nodes on the tree, we've got successive detonations, so that's just another cool 100% right there. There's a bunch of other nodes on the tree as well that add up to around 130. Void Battery itself is adding around 60, and All's Uprising, as long as we are near the enemy, adds another 50. Now this isn't purely necessary. We can get to cap without this, but this is a nice cushion. It's a nice cushion that we have there, and we actually often are nearby to our enemies because the build is quite tanky. And so we don't have a problem being in the thick of things. So there's another 50% right there. And we're close at that point. With that, we're at 95% overall crit chance. And there are 2 ways that I've got at the moment of getting to 100%. One way in mapping, and one way in boss encounters and Trial of the Ancestor. So for mapping, simple enough, Diamond Flask. That's easy. I think, honestly, if there was another flask that I wanted, like if I wanted to take one of the Ellie flasks there or something like that, or a Phazon flask or something, I think that just having a suffix for like a tier 1 critical strike chance suffix might be enough by itself to get us to 100%. I'd have to test it out, but I think it would be. But needless to say, 100% is more than enough to get us over the hump. Or in bossing scenarios, we've got Frost Shield, which this was a late addition to the build. I did not initially set out to do this, but it gives us a ton, and I can just attach it to Arcanist Brand so it casts at the same time as Frost Bomb. And Frost Shield, we can just stand inside the Frost Shield and get a ton of base spell crit, so that, again, clearly gets us over the hump. So we've got one for mapping and one for bossing. That's not to say that you can't use your flask while bossing, but you better kill him quick because you're not going to get many charges in a bossing scenario. So yeah, crit strength or crit chance is definitely a major strength of the build, but I do have more work to do in getting critical strike multiplier beefed up. It's only doing okay at the moment, so that's a pretty clear opportunity that I've got for upgrading. There are other parts of the damage equation though, and we're doing well on those parts. It may be effective to pull up Path of Building to show this. So what are our parts of the damage calculation? We have the flat damage, right? And most of the flat damage is going to be coming from our gem levels. That's going to include a level 21 gem, 2 awakened supports that each give +1, So we've got Awaken Void Manipulation for +1, and Awaken Added Chaos for another +1. And then on top of that, one of our tattoos is also giving us +1 to int skill gems. Now this one's fun because I was saving up for this one. I knew I wanted to get it, and I knew I wanted to put it in this location, but as I was saving up for it, I just found one in Trials, so that was cool. Saved me, what, at least a couple Divine, right? 2 or 3? That was great. And then, so okay, on the increased damage part of the calculation, we're getting a bunch of that from Void Battery. We are getting some of it from a large cluster, a few gem qualities, stuff like that. Oh yeah, and a little bit from the Sulfur Flask as well. On the More side, we're getting a lot of this just from our gems, to be honest, including the whopping 100% more damage that we get from the Hexblast gem itself, as long as the enemy is cursed, which they always are. So all of that, with Minefield being our support for better clear, this gets us north of 3 million damage during mapping scenarios, just with a single toss of the mine. So that's pretty darn good. It's not amazing, but it's pretty good. There's clearly more to invest in, and I want to make sure that I beef up my single target damage as much as possible. It's probably worth mentioning my custom configuration here. 50% increased crit is from All's Uprising, since PoE doesn't recognize it for some reason. And then this right here, the 2% more, 30% less, this is, according to a kind Redditor who enlightened me on this, this is apparently the input you want to give to Path of Building to simulate what it's like to be running around throwing with Minefield. So you put this in here, and then you set the number of mines you're throwing out to 5, because that is the number that Minefield throws. And that gets us to around 3 million, and then I think if we go single target, we can maybe get 7 or 8, which is like, it's fine. This is a Hexblast mine build, so like we should really not be satisfied until we push 20 or 30 million. But that's further on down the line. And that 3 million mapping DPS, there are some elements of that you can't quantify, that aren't going to go into that 3 million number. Some of the build is just, it feels good in other ways. So we move speedily around the map with shield charge. Frostblink, I would never do this build anymore without Frostblink. I've fallen in love with that. It allows for this very snappy throw, teleport, detonate in rapid succession playstyle, and it just winds up feeling smooth as butter, where it feels like you only just threw the mine and you're racing forward and you're practically getting to the destination at the same time the mine is. But because Frostblink is an instant cast skill, you're landing from the teleport and you're already detonating on left click, and like you just don't stop moving, and so it just ends up feeling really good. It doesn't feel in a lot of ways like mines at all, because it feels like you're just constantly moving, constantly dealing damage. It's cool. Additionally, the clear is really good for this build. Often mines and traps get a bad rap on clear because of just the nature of the beast, but because of the amount of mine throwing speed we've got, and thanks to the huge area of effect from being an occultist, we just have these huge explosions from Hexblast. It feels like having Profane Bloom, honestly, even though we don't. And I don't even think Profane Bloom would work with mines, but even if we wanted it to. But it's like having that, or another explodey effect. It just feels really good. Whole packs up in smoke, no problem. And it just overall, the time, from the time that you hit the detonate key, which is all the time if you're having it on left click the way I do, from that time until the time that the purple beam cracks down and hits the enemy, it just feels a lot shorter and snappier than when I was running Pyroclast mine last league. It just feels better than that. No offense, Pyroclast, it's still a good build. But yeah, we can close out the damage section by talking a few general things. We're debuffing enemies with Frostbite, Elemental Weakness, and we're also inflicting cold exposure through Frostbomb, which is, yeah, we can minimize this. Cold exposure with Frostbomb, because as you probably recall, Hexblast has the effect of causing the enemies to defend with their lowest resistance, even though the skill is dealing chaos damage. Cold was the easiest choice. Just due to the existence of Frost Bomb. It's something that Fire and Lightning doesn't really have access to, is another easy way to apply exposure. I've got exposure on my gloves, and truth be told, I actually don't know if this counts from mine hits. I think maybe it does, but there's still benefit to using Frostbomb because Frostbomb applies a stronger version of exposure. It applies a negative 15 exposure. So it's, even if the gloves are working, there is utility in having Frostbomb still. Overall, the damage is good. We do want to pump up the single target, like I said, with Crit Multi, maybe swapping over to a Covenant chest, so getting a 7th link. You get a level 29 added chaos damage, so yes, you lose the +1 support gems there, but I assume that you're gaining a comparable amount of flat damage just by virtue of the fact that it's going to be a level 29 gem, which is extremely high. And then, of course, on top of that, even if that didn't make up the difference, it's opening up a whole other gem slot. Where this is sitting right now, we could just put increased critical damage. I could also foresee in the future things like adding in aspect of the spider, potentially coming up and taking this corruption part of the withered wheel up here. There are some more things that I can do. More work with the jewels, that kind of a thing. But overall, we're looking pretty good right now on offense. So let's talk about defense, how we're staying alive through all this. And this is going to be quite a laundry list because there's a lot of boxes that you need to check if you want to be even vaguely tanky in this game. So let's hop right in. First off, we've got an energy shield pool of 3,200 and 2,000 unreserved life, so we can regen those simultaneously. And yes, the 2,000 life is a little scary looking, but we have maxed out chaos resistance, which is another huge defensive layer, and the mastery for 30% of chaos damage is taken from energy shield rather than life. So between those, I have not had big problems with chaos damage so far. Maybe when I'm facing like Cyrus, I'll feel differently about this and I'll need to beef up my defense somehow, but so far this has been totally fine. And of course, probably goes without saying, our Ascendancy really helps us beef up our chaos resistance without investing a ton into it. Just getting a few rolls here and there. Got a middling roll on the belt. We've got a roll on the gloves, and like not, you can see there's not a ton, but we don't need much. The other big thing, this is like the centerpiece of the build at the moment, is the fact that we have true max block, true max spell block, 75-75 with no glancing blows. See here, glancing blows not allocated, and yet we still have 75-75. Now that took quite a bit of investment. Primarily, we've got the Red Nightmare Jewel, which I knew from the beginning. Very first day of the league, I knew I wanted this. The price fluctuated up and down, but it kept hovering in that 2.5 to 3 divine range. And unlike Sandstorm Visage, which was plummeting throughout the week, so that at the beginning of this weekend, I did pick this up when it had plummeted down from 11 down to 3 div. This one seemed like it was just kind of hovering in the same price range, so I bit the bullet and just bought it at, I think, 2.8 I might have paid for it. And this and a couple of fire tattoos and this wheel over here adds an enormous amount of blocks. Remember, Red Nightmare takes whatever elemental resist or fire resist that is in radius, and it takes 50% of that and adds it as chance to block attack damage. So from this wheel, you're getting 3, 6, 9, plus 4 from the wheel itself, plus 6, and then down here you're getting 4 here, 4 here. This is a huge part of what gets us to 75 on attack block, and we are also running Tempest Shield and taking some spell block nodes up here. Yeah, we didn't end up needing to take any other. So we're at 75-75, which feels great. It's arguable whether it's as good as suppression or not, because some hits are going to sneak through. But if you do the math, a hit like Cyrus's Die Beam, which is one of the scarier hits in the game, as long as you've got a life pool north of 5,000, which we do, you would have to get very unlucky and roll both all fizz. Cyrus's die beam rolls between different types. It has 3 components, and it can roll fizz, any of the elements, or chaos. And if you get very unlucky and you were to hit like 3 fizz in a row, which armor does not apply to, and all 3 of them were to go unblocked, that would be very poor luck, but it is possible, then you would die to that as a one-shot. But if any of those come through as elemental, and or if you're able to block 1 or more of them, then you're fine. So yes, there is some weakness to one-shotting in this build, but it's not ridiculous, and in most scenarios it feels very good and very tanky. Our armor is sitting around 20,000 with no flasks. This is a little bit of a misnomer. There are things that are up in combat that are not here, but then with flasks it's at 37,000. So although it's not perfect, that's still quite good. We would benefit from endurance charges still, so that's at 37,000 is not enough that we're trivializing physical attacks. We would like some just flat off the top physical damage reduction, and the best way to do that is endurance charges. We've got this keystone down here, Divine Shield. This plays very nicely with our armor. We're preventing a good fair chunk of physical damage, and keep in mind, big thing about this, blocking is considered preventing damage. So 75% of the time, if a physical hit is coming in, you are getting 100% of that damage is figuring into Divine Shield, and you take 3% of that and you regen it as Energy Shield. So that's very cool. Speaking of regen, both our body armor and our belt have the regen 150 energy shield per second while there's a rare or unique enemy nearby. Now, pretty much every dangerous situation in this game is going to involve a rare or unique enemy being nearby, so it's nice to have consistent 300 flat increased ES regen from these mods. Then let's talk ailments, because that was a big deal and one that took some effort, like the block thing. So we're getting shock immunity from Tempest Shield. We're getting freeze and chill from Brine King. I know it's reduced effective chill, but it's still pretty good. And freeze immunity is the one that you really need. We're also getting pseudo stun immunity from Brine King. We are, yes, you can get stunned now and again, but you will not get stunned locked. So that's, again, pretty good. We're getting ignite. We are not fully permanently immune to ignite, but we are fighting it through a couple of mechanisms. We have the Aberrath Pantheon, which gives 60% less duration, which is a big deal to start with. And we also do have a flask that makes us immune to ignite and removes burning on use. This is a potential area of weakness. There can be some ignites that'll slip through and deal damage to us, but as long as our flasks are staying up, we feel pretty good about this. We are getting immunity to corrupted blood here. We are getting immunity to bleeding through a combination of the boot implicit modifier, an abyssal jewel, and a tattoo, which is this one. Chance to avoid bleeding. And that gets us to 100%. We do still technically take poison damage. We are not immune to poison. We are not negating poison directly. But we do have maxed out chaos resistance, and so we typically are able to just kind of regen through it. Stand on the consecrated ground from your sulfur flask, and you probably won't even notice the poison. So yeah, it still technically affects us, but it's not been a big deal. We have got, to close this down, a less damage multiplier associated with, or reduced damage multiplier associated with this Mind Mastery, so up to 10%. Very good. We have got... What else are we looking at? Oh yeah, let's just talk. How are we slowing the enemies down? So, Skitterbots is chilling the enemies. Hexblast is freezing the enemies. And Touch of Cruelty up here, here we go, is hindering the enemies. Now, as it turns out, I liked the idea of getting Aspect of the Spider on the build, but it applies the same type of hinder that Touch of Cruelty does, so it might be a little bit of a waste to use Aspect of the Spider. You do get more damage from Aspect of the Spider, but it's a little redundant since we're already hindering enemies. Once upon a time, this build did run temp chains and enfeeble, so that would even slow and weaken them up even more. I would love to fit at least temp chains back into the build, because I think that's going to interact really nicely, multiplying with these other sources of reduced movement speed, and really just slow them down to a crawl. But in order to fit that back in, we would ideally want to anoint Whispers of Doom on our amulet, because this is just 5 points too many to take, even for this. So we'd have to anoint it on our amulet, and since we're relying on charisma right now, I don't foresee this happening until and unless we can get way more investment into mana res efficiency, or, I don't know, just get Ashes of the Stars. just press the cheat button. So, yeah, I think that pretty much does it on the defense. How could I forget, in the context of blocking, how could I forget to mention Aegis Aurora? It's the whole reason that I have double max block, max spell, and max attack block, is that it's giving 2% of armor whenever I block. So 75% of the time, we are taking no damage at all, and instead regenning a minimum of 300 to 400 energy shield instantly. Regen is the wrong word. Regen occurs over time. Aegis Aurora happens instantaneously. If one hit restores energy shield and the next hit would have killed you, you don't die. It's immediate. So even with no flasks up, nothing going for our armor, it's 300 or 400, and then it can be over 7 with flasks up. And the further you push your armor, the better it gets. So yeah, I think we've talked offense, we've talked defense. Yeah, we've got some of the tattoos there shoring up our spell damage. This, I'm never going to get rid of this. Sorry, I know I'm coming out of my way to come down and get this Mystic Bulwark, but the combination of giving me 6 spell block and mana regen, you cannot underestimate the importance of mana regen in this build. Super, super important. You are reserving down to near 0 mana when you throw your mines out. So if you check it out, you're near 0. You have just enough mana to keep throwing your mines out, but only just. And so as the mines start expiring, keep an eye on the mana there. And look at the mana racing back upwards. Now, we had to do some work to get it that way. So we've got -7 mana cost on a ring, and we've also got skills cost life instead of 30% of mana cost. Those were necessary in order to have our mana regen outpace our costs. One thing that could happen in the future would be introducing a medium cluster jewel that has arcane pyrotechnics on it, or if I got very, very lucky, maybe arcane pyrotechnics would appear on a cluster jewel with like enduring composure on a megalomaniac. That, I think, would be the dream. I wouldn't want to lose second skin, but I would consider it if a megalomaniac became available. Of course, the dream would be a megalomaniac that has second skin on it with enduring composure and arcane pyrotechnics. If that existed, I'd pay everything I own for it. Not that that's particularly a lot right now. That would be ideal. But even if we do end up having to get rid of the second skin to fit in enduring composure and arcane pyrotechnics, we can shore that up, right? So we can. Our spell block is right at 75. Attack block is at 76. So we would need to make up 2 attack block and 3 spell block somewhere. And I would be thinking about maybe allocating this and putting a tattoo on it is maybe a possibility. I'm not sure. We'd find it somewhere because the spell block, we can get the alt quality Tempest Shield that with 20 quality is going to add another couple percentage points to your spell block, so then we would only need 1 additional tattoo somewhere up here to hit spell block. And then, yeah, I don't know. We're tight on strength, so I don't even know if I have any more nodes. I have 1 here, we've got a few there, but we need 155, so I can really only afford 1 more tattoo. I guess the question is this right here within the boundary of the Red Nightmare? Because if so, adding a fire right there would be sufficient to get me back over attack, block, cap, even without second skin. That would free up this cluster jewel area over here to have a megalomaniac, which I think is the ideal state. Covenant, the Covenant would be a big loss to survivability. We would lose the increased aura effect, increased discipline aura effect. We would have to find some of our resistances elsewhere. We would lose the regen. I think we would get a little bit of added energy shield from the Covenant because it is a pure energy shield base, not a hybrid armor energy shield. But we would mainly be taking the Covenant for damage purposes. Like, I wouldn't take that unless it was going to add at least 30 or 40% to my current DPS total. So, yeah, I think that is about it for the update. Again, this has been feeling really, really good. You saw the clips. It's feeling very smooth. It's killing quickly. It's staying alive. And so this is going to be what I farm with for the foreseeable future. Maybe see if we can either beef up this build or work on a Mage Blood, work on a follow-up build. I don't know. But we are in a place with this build where it is very easy to do some farming of whatever content I like. So I'm, for the moment, doing a combination of Blight, Expedition, Altars, Delve, and Trials of the Ancestor, something like that. And then logbooks as well. I'm just a smattering of stuff, and it does great at all of it. So very happy with the build. We'll check in maybe in another week, see how things are going. Until then, appreciate you tuning in. Take it easy, everybody.